Thank you so much. Wow, this is such an emotional moment for me, actually, because I used to live here in Vilnius for 4 years, and actually I was living in Domashevich's Gatve, so Labas Rytas and everything. I know a couple of coffee shops. I went through all of them. Okay, so I can give you some good recommendations. Backstage is one of the good ones. Just saying, just saying. But today I want to share a few things with you. I want to share some of the shady secrets. And if I look at you very carefully, it looks like you like shady, you like secrets, and you like dark corners of the web. Am I correct? That's all you're going to give me? Am I correct? Yeah, more or less? Okay. So the question is, how dark can we get? And do we want to go dark? Now, first of all, just a little check. Good, good, good. I do not take any responsibility for what happens next in this session. The things you might see, you might not be able to unsee, and this is done so by design, so this is not on me. Now, this is me. This is how I used to look like back in the day. You know, things do change over time. But basically, like 50% of my time is spent in consultancy, where I find a lot of really interesting and strange designs and also front-end solutions that kind of bring up into talks like this. And yeah, we co-founded like a magazine a while back. We turned from white, beautiful, shiny thing into a red monster overnight. But by doing so, we actually learned a lot of lessons along the way as well. And one of the lessons we learned is how to kind of bring in personality back to the web. And so when we look into shady, dark corners, I think many of us are kind of looking into these experiments where we try to be different, just sometimes for the sake of being different, and as a result, breaking the web. And it's not because we don't know better, it's just because it's, we try to do something slightly different. When I talk to managers, when I'm working any kind of projects, very often you will end up with this kind of conversation, where managers would see a design process or a front-end process, a development process, a choosing of a tooling, of a framework, it doesn't matter, we'll see it a very linear, iterative process, where you start somewhere and you iterate. And the design process, and again, each of those processes are weird and complicated because they involve people and systems which are inherently weird and complicated. So we end up in this being a traditional path of our front-end development, right? Where you start somewhere and go, and you iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate until at some point you hit the finish line and you're supposed to be done. But the reality looks slightly more complicated and nuanced, because this is what it looks like in every single decision we make, right? Where we have to start somewhere, of course, and go. We explore and diverge and try to find out what might work better, right? And then eventually, we might hit that dead end, and from that dead end, we have to recover somehow, and this is where we're losing time, right? And we don't like losing time, right? So we tend to use things that used to work in the past. Many of you might have seen this tweet a while back. Which of these two possible websites are you actually designing or building today? There is one on the left, there is one on the right, and that's pretty much it. The only difference sometimes is the choice of a carousel, because you can have a carousel on the top, or at the bottom, or both at the top and the bottom, because why not, right? And we end up kind of being locked in this kind of ocean of just ongoing iterative A/B testing. And A/B tests are important, of course they are, but they're not giving us the big picture, right? They're giving us a small picture, which kind of makes us lose the big picture over time. And so if we look just at the iteration of Adobe Toolbar, Photoshop Toolbar, over the span of 30 freaking years, from 1987 until 2017, right? Not much has changed, but maybe at some point in between, maybe even 2007, 20 years after the release, it would have been a good idea to really rethink the interface altogether and think about how to do things very, very differently. But instead, we rely on small, little iterations. How many of you had conversations with your designers in the past? Maybe, border radius for rounded corners. Okay, let's settle on 11 pixels. And then, no, 12. No. 2 months later, after enormous A/B testing, 13, right? And it maybe doesn't matter, but we are learning from those big companies doing this kind of tests a lot, that it does matter. Like if you look at the Facebook's bottom navigation, the evolution of that navigation over the span of 2 days, pushing a pixel to the left, a pixel to the right, a little bit more blue, a little bit less blue. And I'm wondering, does it really matter? Does it bring us to the point where we actually have to over-optimizing maybe, or does it really matter in terms of conversion? Because we know how to make things that stand out. If I ask you about one of those memorable websites that you've seen over the last couple of months or years maybe, some of us might have an issue actually kind of bringing up one. This is the one that I will remember for quite some time. And I can almost imagine how many people, resources, time, money, effort had to be put into making this happen. And of course, it has to be responsive, and it has to be performant, and it has to be accessible. That's an incredible amount of work. That's not something you can pull off on a Sunday evening. This is going to take quite some time. And as you go down, it just keeps going mad, right? And of course, we know how to create something that stands out. It's not like we don't know what we're doing. It's just very difficult to do so in this kind of complicated world we're living in, right? And so for a long time, I was looking very hard into how can we make things that would feel a bit more interesting and engaging. And if I look at Uber, for example, and I don't have anything bad to say about Uber per se, but it's really easy for me to move away from Uber. There is not a lot of connection between me and that company or that app. And the reason being, if there was something cheaper, like Bolt, right? 30 cents cheaper maybe on average, I'll jump right away. I don't have any loyalty to Uber, but I have a very strong loyalty with MailChimp, right? I mean, it's really hard for me to move away from MailChimp, and it's not about the monkey. I know it's not about the monkey. It's about the values that the company reflects in their product. They would create things like this. Color book for children, for parents and for children, and they would just give them away in the streets for free. And this is beautiful, right? And it has an incredibly powerful, a very simple language, and there is no button anywhere saying MailChimp is the best email company in the world, because nobody likes email. Who cares about email? We have better things to do in our lives. We have to deal with email. But they make it like an entire story around it. So, hi, I'm Freddy. It's fun to be me. Is it fun to be you? I mean, how can you answer it in a negative way? Like, I'm no fun. I'm the most boring person in the world, right? And it keeps going and going and going, right? And this is the same story. I love being me. Do you love being you? I hate myself every day I wake up, right? Nobody would say that. It's really hard to answer these questions in a negative way, right? And this little thing, this little animation that they have before you send out an email campaign to 200,000 people, that captures that emotion that you're experiencing in such a profound way, and you're laughing, but this is how you actually connect on a personal level. And this is what makes me pay MailChimp a lot of money. They're not it's not a relatively cheap product. It's a quite expensive product, but I'm happy to pay for it, mostly maybe because of these moments. So how can we make things a bit more interesting? Well, for a long time, we've been thinking about making things predictable and obvious, and not that sophisticated for the sake of cleanliness, right? But maybe at this point, it's about time to bring in a little bit of friction every now and again to make people think just for a second so they can connect with us in the first place. Now, if you look into this website, that's maybe not what I'm talking about. That's maybe a little bit too much friction, right? Everything over the map, and a good example of things just done for the sake of maybe being different, but also a little bit too much, if I ask, right? We cannot go ahead and just sacrifice accessibility and usability just for the sake of being trendy or fancy or cool or nice or shiny, right? This is not quite what I'm talking about here. But maybe just adding a little bit of touch or flavor every now and again. Apparently, I heard marquee is the new hipster thing. Everywhere you go, you'll find marquee or blinking thing over and over, kind of showing up. That's not necessarily bad, but even this navigation, which you might think is kind of weird, when we run the tests on usability of that site, people love this navigation. They loved it, mostly because the hit targets are huge, it's easy to click, the labels are huge, you can read it easily. That's perfect, right? It's just a bit inconvenient, I would say, but it's not necessarily bad. And we like to hide navigation, right? We like hiding navigation because, oh my God, navigation, they're horrible. We have a hamburger icon and we will hide all the navigation away. Well, maybe we can expose the navigation if it kind of fits in within the story. Here we have a point campus, which is a kind of has different rooms for students, and they kind of have this entire story going on. And yes, half of the screen, only half of the screen, is dedicated to the content, but the other thing kind of fits in within that story that they're telling. So in that regard, it might not be bad. Now, I'm telling this story quite a lot, but this is a very important one. Now, Tijuana Flats is a chain of restaurants, Mexican restaurants in the US. And this is what they look like. That might or might not be your thing. That's perfectly fine. But they have a lot of stuff going on. And these are the people in the restaurants, right? And these are the ceilings. So it's a kind of a major adventure there every time. Because every 4 or 5 months or so, they would hire professional graffiti artists to come in and repaint and unfold and continue the story. And so, of course, that personality that they embody, right, has to be somehow manifested in the restaurant menu. So that's the restaurant menu. That's kind of fitting. And of course, the website should reflect that personality as well. So this is the website. You can think for a second how you would build it and make it performant and accessible and fast, and responsive, by the way, right? And if you think that this is it, you have no idea what's coming. That's quite a website, I would say, right? But in many ways, it kind of fits in with their personality, right? And they also do a lot of things like this just to reflect that identity that they have, right? And one of the things that they did is this little thing where you enter the site, and the first thing you see is kind of a vending machine, I guess. And you have joystick, and this is the like, look at this freaking carousel. Beautiful. And you have wonderful social media buttons and joystick that does nothing, because why not, right? And then you keep scrolling, and you have this donation box, you know, kind of fitting in with the vending machine story. And then actually, if you scroll further down, you can turn on and power and pull the plug, literally, and then everything goes dark, because why not? You know, that makes perfect sense. And then if you turn back the lights, it kind of starts, you know, working again and all. And then if you resize, of course, it kind of changes a little bit as well, because we tend to think in predictable shapes, like let's adjust the layout to fit, right? Let's adjust the performance to fit. But maybe sometimes it might be really interesting to reconsider and do something slightly different or entirely different, right? So if we look into this site, it kind of has this personality I'm talking about. Although maybe it's not necessarily your style, but it kind of does the job fairly well. And if you go on the small screen, look at that. That's just perfect, right? And so in the spirit of everything we know about performance and design and accessibility and web fonts being horrible and textures being expensive and all of that, they moved away from both of these designs to this design. That's pretty much it, right? And I think there is a lot lost in terms of personality between the previous one and this one. And no company knows it better than Bloomberg, where they end up creating this marquee is a hipster thing, I told you, where they have these kind of crazy things going on, where they hired a bunch of designers who were given the freedom to do whatever they wanted. And literally, they did whatever they wanted, right? So, and you might say, oh, okay, who likes this design? Who doesn't really like it? Well, this is the most stupid question I could ask you. What does it even mean? The design is supposed to serve a purpose. It's supposed to solve a problem. So they sold all tickets to that conference 2 months ahead of time. And that was 1 month faster compared to the previous year. So it's brilliant design. It's probably the best thing they did ever, because it actually served its purpose, right? And so they keep doing things like this. I mean, this is just madness. How often do you see this on the web? Right? Now, this is a real friction, just adding things in for the sake of adding things in, I guess. Just to provoke at this point, because everybody is bored of sameness on the web, right? So we end up with this kind of experiences, which kind of take every single rule that we know and break it, right? Now, that's a calendar. That's a wonderful calendar pattern you go ahead and use, right? So this may be a little bit too much friction, but we don't have to go overboard like that. You know, if we look into something like this, right, which may be a little bit too much also and inaccessible, I hope you appreciate the cursor, the hover effect on the cursor. I would say it's a little bit disrespectful, right? But if you take the same idea and you turn it upside down in a very calm setting, you know, that's okay if you can move things around. Maybe that could be your thing. Just a little bit of friction every now and again. Like, make your own website, in a way, right? So maybe this is okay, right, in some way. But it's also important to not just add some frictions for the sake of it. It's probably a good idea to turn something that's really boring, inherently boring, and make it a bit more interesting. Like one really nice example for that is Hans Brinker Hotel, which is a hotel in Amsterdam. And this is a really bad hotel. Sorry, if I broke your dreams at this point. They don't have many good reviews on TripAdvisor, and that was a problem because they were not selling enough rooms. So they hired a designer who was paid one burrito, by the way, and was also given the freedom to do what they wanted. And so they didn't have the money to make it better. So if you can't make it better, make it worse, right? So they tried to sell, instead of selling the best hotel experience in the world, they tried to sell the worst hotel experience in the world. And guess what? They're fully selling out at this point, so they have to expand to Lisbon because everybody wants to experience the worst hotel experience in the world, right? And so the photos and everything on the site has to reflect this personality as well. And one way or the other, you might like it or not, but that personality kind of shines through, right? And so even if you think about like boring things like, I don't know, social media buttons, Facebook-like buttons. Anybody likes Facebook buttons? Well, at this point, I would say you either don't use them at all or go overboard, right? Because you can, right? If you really want to be liked, just make it explicit, right? Anybody likes pop-ups? I love pop-ups. This is the best pop-up in the world. I wish every single website had it. It fits in the story. It's great. And it's really difficult to close. It really is. It's super annoying. But it's wonderful in so many ways. You take something that's very, very boring and you make it a bit more interesting, right? It's very different from what I showed in the beginning, like really complicated, advanced, sophisticated experiences. That everybody can pull off, right? Think about something like this, a prompt, age prompt. How old are you? Now that's a nice gesture. This is you want to buy a beer for somebody, for a friend, and they ask you, how old are you? Right? That's not friendly. And in fact, here in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, you can enter 32nd of 43rd month of 1,547, and you will still enter the site. Because it's really not so important for them. It's like, yeah, okay, you're going to lie anyway, so whatever. That's fine. But you can take, again, something that's boring and turn it upside down, like this. You can also ask, are you 21? If you click yes, all right, that's it. You enter the site and you're done. And if not, let's have a story. Right? And then it keeps going and going. And again, this is not difficult to do. Like everybody can pull that off. Just pop up, right? You're not going to click yes at this point, right? And then, of course, you end up with a video that actually is fitting for your choice, right? And so now that's easy to do. Everybody can do that. That's not expensive at all. The same goes for the title. Like, Mr., Miss, Mrs., this kind of thing. So it's so boring. So make it interesting. Who would you like to be today? Maybe you'd like to be a princess, or maybe field marshal lord. And it's a really long list. It's a huge list, actually. And actually, when you get a package from them, because they sell like clothing and stuff, you're actually getting called Squadron Leader Friedman. That sounds pretty interesting. How often do you see that, right? So you take something boring and make it a bit more interesting. And, even if you make people wait a little bit, so make them wait. That's fine, a little animation that goes all the way. Or like a little radio button. How it can be done better? Like think about this. This is boring, right? So maybe you could make it a bit more interesting. Right? Because you can, right? You can play ping pong. Maybe instead of asking, please subscribe, like make them click twice, or 3 times, or 4 times, right? That could be interesting. Right? That's pretty cool. But it's not enough, right? You can also play a little bit here and there, but you also need to provide some signature because this is not going to run alone, right? So for that, if we look on the site, on the websites, very often we see custom illustrations. And these illustrations are wonderful and beautiful, but very often they also follow trends and styles that we're all used to. So if you look at all the sites, they are different, but in many ways they are similar. And it's very difficult to tell them apart as well. Now, how do you turn it upside down? Well, with Bond, for example, which is a conference website as well, it's a very interesting concept of how you tie in 4 major components: the color, the typography, the background, and illustrations together, right? Here, all of them are kind of working seamlessly, while if you just get custom illustrations and put them on a white background, it will pretty much look like everything else as well, right? So you can actually do a little bit there. You can also just define your own little signature and use it, right? It could be something like motion, where you try to play with the movement of letters, and that could be your thing. Just one little thing you use consistently and everywhere, and that's it. You don't need to do much more than that. Or maybe you could have, oh, that's a little bit too much. And maybe you could also have something like a theme. So this is the motion, so movies, this kind of thing, right? So end up with texture and movie-alike feeling of like the background change. This is it. But if you put that away or remove it, it will look like every other website out there, right? Maybe glitch, right? That could also work. I mean, there are so many options. We just need to find one little thing and use it all the way. In our email campaigns, in our website, in our applications, and pretty much everywhere else. Because you don't need much to do that. Or even like little something really, really simple. Maybe just this kind of shading, like a pencil. You take a pencil, stencil kit or so, and you have drawing, a line, or something of that kind. Right, and use it everywhere, like including the website. That alone will actually help you stand out a little bit more, right? And it's very interesting to see how sometimes bold solutions actually make up for a really interesting experience. You need to test it and see if it actually works in real life or not. But if you look into the treatment of typography and how you can play with it, with larger blocks and larger content, larger illustrations, that can actually work fairly well. If you bring it back to, like, let's say 90s, it will look like full of animated GIFs and rotating babies and all of that stuff, right? But now it kind of feels like it's really nice. It really works fairly well, right? So you could, of course, go overhead and do this. I mean, that's maybe a little bit too much. This is a website. At least, I mean, officially it is a website. Anybody knows how the video text works? Or teletext? I'm not sure how it was called. So in teletext or video text, essentially you punch numbers on a TV screen, and then you go from one page to another, very much like, links. So if you have a similar experience, you could maybe mimic teletext as well. So you can type in the numbers at the upper right corner, you can move from one page to another. I mean, this is maybe a little bit too much at this point. But again, just a simple idea taking to the next level here. But going to slightly more practical approaches, there are also beasts that we all like and hate. One of them is the hamburger icon. Oh, we like to hate hamburger icons. We really do. The reality is there is a family of hamburger icons. You pick yours, right? You have a choice. You can have Oreos and chocolate and cheeseburger and hot dog. Even a veggie burger is available at this point. So you go at this point and choose what really pleases you. But the most important thing that we need to study first is the movement of the palm and how we use the palm. Because in many ways, when we're designing for mobile, many design decisions will be thumb-driven. And so we really have to study how thumb works, how index finger works, and how the palm works. And we need to be kind of careful, because some areas are more accessible than the others from the very start. We tend to use different pressure to push our buttons in the upper left corner, in the upper right corner, at the bottom. We tend to use different posture as well. So if you cross a bridge, for example, you will adopt one of those positions most of the time repeatedly if you have to reply to an email or look up something on Google or Bing. Right? So you'll be using either one of those, where you're using a thumb or the index finger. This is unlikely for typing. It's more like for videos and carousels, maybe sliding through, and games. Right? And very often we'll also be using this one, one hand first order, one hand second order, or this one for typing. Right? So these are the different postures, although that's not true. Actually, just a few weeks ago in Vilnius airport, I saw somebody using a pinky finger to tap on a button. Why? Why would you do that? No, there were other fingers. There were other fingers, I promise. Now, this is a very famous, or actually infamous, checkbox tab. Like this little checkbox, subscribe to newsletter, that you definitely want to untap. That's the tab, right? But most of the time, we'll be using these positions, right? And that's very important to study them carefully, because in the end, what you end up with is this for our beautiful hamburger icon, right? I mean, seriously, I don't know about this guy, but what's really interesting about this particular study is, by Stephen Huber, by the way, is that not even a single person, not even a single of all those participants hit the center of the icon, right? Not even a single one. So the input is always imprecise, and we really have to deal with those targets being that have to be really big enough, right? And if we study the average index finger width, we'll find out that it's on average around 11 millimeters, right? But if you go to smaller ones, like again, that checkbox thing, you end up with many people missing the tab, right? Or not clicking properly. So you will end up with big issues. So you kind of really have to go to that extreme, like 11 millimeters or 13 millimeters. And as we browse through the screen, very often we'll look at the center of the screen. And so if we put the buttons, the critical call to action buttons, and the edges, like here or here, and where does our hamburger icon lives most of the time? Yes, all the way up there. Then they probably need to be bigger, and they need to have a higher, bigger tab area. Where in the center, we kind of feel comfortable. So people read in the center, people tap in the center, people scroll in the center, and in the end, when it comes to the most important content, of course it will live in the center, but at the bottom will be the second most important, most premium area for our call to action buttons like buy now, or add to cart, or next action, right? And then everything else will be all the way up. So we kind of have to design around these priorities as well. But what it actually means for us is that we need to take a closer look at our interfaces, which is why we see many things like this showing up these days, right? Where we see hamburger icon all of a sudden jumping from the top to the bottom. Or this, where you kind of expose an important part at the bottom. So instead of having the menu and tickets at the very top, you make it closer to the thumb. So you have the tickets and the menu operating at the bottom, right? Many other similar things happening as well, like the New York Times actually did this design, which is a bit bold. Just one sentence at the bottom with a floating hamburger icon at the bottom as well. So the entire interaction is actually happening in the in the bottom right corner, right? So this is quite risky and interesting. And in fact, some applications are actually taking that extra route and do something entirely different. One of them is Ada, which looks beautiful. It really does. But Ada is an application for tracking medical intake. And so it has to be, of course, fully accessible. And of course, this hamburger icon will not live at the top because it's not accessible for the thumb. So everything is actually happening at the bottom. The logo is at the bottom. The call to action is at the bottom. The menu is at the bottom. So everything is kind of happening within the reach of the thumb. It looks a little bit strange on larger or taller screens because they still have the breadcrumbs at the top. But as you can see, like a lot of movement is around the bottom area, right? Which is kind of significant. Right? I mean, you can also make it a little bit too much, maybe. So this is a postal service from Iceland. Don't ask me how I got to that site. So they have a lot of navigation going on here in the sidebar. But if you just translate it to bottom bar, that's becoming a bit too much. Right? When you have 5 or 7 items, this is where things get a little bit more complicated. So you can't really pull that off. But overall, when we look into the hamburger icon, one thing that's always good to have is a very clear mapping. So when you can close and open the navigation bar at the same spot. So if we look at TQ here, right? On the small screen, it's all fine. So we can actually click on that button. It turns into X, and we can close it. So the difference between actions is the step from one action to the other action, opening and closing, is very easy and simple, straightforward. But whenever you have this distance that you have to travel with your mouse or with your finger to move, to close, and to open, this is where often issues appear. So if you can reserve the space to open and close in the same spot, it can actually serve good service for you as well. That's at least what usability study shows. Another thing that's kind of surprising to see is this, where we tend to hide important actions behind very non-important icons. I mean, if you think about closets that you have in your apartment or in your house, it's very unlikely for you to just put important things in a closet in the basement. You just don't do that. But we're kind of used to putting important things behind the closet in here in navigation icon. If you have login and sign up, which are very critical for that website, why don't you use the space that you actually have at the very top to highlight them? Like having the hamburger icon with a navigation that has only 2 items, the critical items, and download the app might not really be the best option for you to explore. Because if you hide something, you should not be expecting more traffic coming this way, right? Another thing that's really interesting is carousels. Nobody likes carousels. Anybody likes carousels? You will love carousels, I promise. Because there is nothing wrong with carousels. Look at this carousel and the carousel. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. But most of the time when we design or build a carousel, it will look like this. That's not very exciting. Right, so you have the arrow to the left and arrow to the right and mysterious dots in between. Now, when I was in Turkey, I decided to make it my mission to study the carousels there, and they look very different. Now, that's a freaking carousel, right? So they will never use dots because dots are not hipster enough, I guess. So they will use numbers, many, 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 many numbers. So if you want to land in the world of Carouselorama, and they have 8 different carousels on the side, by the way, on the page here alone, that will be a slightly different experience. And you might wonder, how would I translate it to a mobile screen? I'm glad you asked, because you like dots, so here we go. Right? And in fact, there are many, many examples of that in action in Turkey. This is my favorite one, where you'll find a horizontal carousel, vertical carousel, the carousel with thumbnails, and this slider, the classic, right? All of it in one spot. That's maybe a little bit too much as well, right? But you can make it better. Like, because this is also a carousel. This is one that's coming from a like kind of bookshelf. And of course, you'd be presenting the books kind of in that shelf experience. And as you move from one to another, this is still a carousel. That's a slightly different way of designing a carousel, right? If you want to make a very strong impact, one easy way to do would be, of course, to go bold and maybe use the full background, right? So this is actually a self-rotating carousel, but it's a wonderful carousel to look at, right? Because they use this metaphor of the watch and things like that. You could also add some labels to it, right? So you can actually more predictably navigate through the different segments of the carousel, maybe even use different shapes. Like, we don't have to use only rectangle, only circle. This is like the first rule that we always take. What if we do not use circles, squares, or rectangles at all? What will we come up with, right? Or even this, maybe tilt things a little bit, and as you tap, then of course it will show up and bring up. But if you're working on a regular carousel, maybe one of those could do the justice for you. So instead of having the dots, replace them with something meaningful, like a thumbnail and label and text and content that would actually indicate what the page is all about. Right? This is at least what seems to be working best for Amazon. How much time do I have? I have time. And I was running. The other thing that's really fundamentally important when you start combining things is how to deal with configurators. Now, this is where things start getting really nasty. I'm sorry for what you're going to see next. Now, if we look into calculators or configurators, very often they would be extremely boring and look pretty much like this. Where you start going from one step to the other. Step 1, radio buttons, input fields, checkboxes, this kind of stuff. And then you end up going to the next step, and of course you are getting here step 2, right? And so then you have a couple of radio buttons again, and checkboxes, and nothing special at this point. And you just keep going and going and going. No excitement at all. And you're still on step 2, although you clicked on next. And this is the point where you actually stop using that configurator because it's not predictable enough, right? And you also see these configurators sometimes. Do you know how this works? Like whenever you want to plug in, like check in the airport, sometimes they will use this kind of thing for your passport expiry date, which is interesting. So you understand how it works? It's a configurator. You build your own date. This is how it is. 19 plus 50 plus 6, September 27, and here we go, September 27, 1956, right? So this was designed actually for the New York Public Library, where it's much faster for people to tap on large buttons on the dashboard. So there it works fairly well, but in airport check-in websites, maybe not so much. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. Imagine you want to build and buy your own yacht, because who doesn't, right? So you go to Sesame Marine and they have this nice video. Sorry for the quality, the screen is too good. So you end up on this beautiful site, and then you are like, yeah, that's the time I want to buy it. So you click on build your own yacht, and then you choose a preset. This is how it usually works, right? And okay, flash a light configurator loader, and okay. And then you're getting half a carousel. They don't even give you a full carousel, only half of it. 2 hamburger icons for the price of 1. That's nice, right? That's interesting. And you kind of start walking around and looking like okay, oh, okay, okay. And then you realize, I know. There is a hide summary checkbox. I click on it, and then that is, yes. Oh, damn it, and then it appears again, right? So it's all very frustrating, and you're giving somebody, or you're willing to give somebody 1 million euros at this point, and they give you half a carousel? That's just not cool. I mean, this is just unacceptable. Here's another one. This is an insurance calculator for a German, big German bank. And so the interface looks pretty classy and all, and they ask a few questions. One of them is, do you have children? And I'm wondering, I mean, this is really interesting. I'm wondering at some point somebody must be sitting in front of Photoshop or Sketch and thinking, do you have children? Slider, right? And this is just so weird. I mean, how come these things happen? Because, I mean, Slider has this property. You can have a minimum value, which is probably 0, I guess, 0, and then the maximum value that you have to set. So what value will you be setting? Now, surprisingly, you could set something like 5, right? So this is what they do, right? And then you can click on the pencil icon, and if you have, let's say, 6 or want to have 7, right? You can change it to 7, but it will tell you, 5, right? Now, that's a nice freaking slider. Yeah, this is confusing. But of course, you end up with this kind of websites quite a lot. Configurators for cars, for example, right? Where you end up with many moving parts. I mean, for Ferrari, for example, it's very critical to have a night view, right? Because for night view, I mean, why would you drive Ferrari during the day? That just doesn't make sense, right? So you need a night view. You also probably need a comparison view, because you might have a Ferrari at home already. So you might want to compare that the Ferrari that you have at home fits well with the Ferrari you're going to design next, or kind of buy next. So kind of design 2 configurators for the price of 1 again at this point. So you can compare, move things around. That's pretty cool. And then as you keep going down, just selecting a wheel. You don't even see the car anymore. And you also want to pay somebody, I don't know how much money, to get that car. So if you want to make things a bit more exciting, we kind of need to emphasize the visual impact to really drag people in. One of these things would be, something like this. You take up the entire screen, and this is very often going to be the metric that you're going to be designing or building around. How much space do we dedicate to the car? That product is the most important part. So you could dedicate 100%, right? And play with the elements within that car to make them be a bit more interesting. But of course, that's very expensive to produce. Not everybody can pull that off. But you can still do something similar, like those little 3D renderings, like in Weber, for example, right? Where you can play a little bit, and they have these bubbles, and you get rotated and zoomed into that point of interest, right? And then you can play with it a little bit, kind of open up some of the areas as well, like explore the lid. And it's really a very interactive and nice experience, right? And this is something that's much more manageable compared to the previous example, right? And probably the easiest way you can pull that off, really, is if you go ahead and introduce some sort of building blocks or bubbles on top of that car, right? And so as we move it around, you might have this kind of little things where you can drag and zoom into, right, to the point of interest. That's probably the easiest way we can pull off, right? Well, that's pretty interesting. It could look something along the lines of this, right? And very often you will also have to deal with things like this, which are presets, packages, things like that, of course, where you can make some decisions for the user already, right? But again, at this point, the most important part is to emphasize the car or the product, and you can even make people click or tap on specific parts, like it's done here on that side. I mean, if you have very thin or very small parts, it might be difficult to tap, right? But if it's a bit bigger, you can do that, and you can gray out everything else, and you focus on the options for that particular part of the experience. The same goes for here for guitars, for example. When you have very small things, it's very hard to tap them properly, right? So you can do many, many things, but the most important one is performance, of course. Because if it takes ages for the site to be, for the customizer to even load, then it's not going to help you. So here, once you select the shoe, you will need to wait, even on a smarter connection, faster connection, on a pretty decent machine, you'll need to wait at least 15 to 20 seconds for render to appear. And then every time you change the toe type or heel type, you need to just keep waiting. And at some point, people will hit refresh twice, and they will leave forever, right? So if you can make that work, that's probably not going to fly, right? Or sometimes you can cheat, right? If you can break things apart, like here on the Lego figurine, and preload all of them individually, and then whenever you're finished with your figurine, essentially you just put all of it together, and you have it. Right? This is pretty cool and nice. And sometimes you can pull off this trick when if you have very small replaceable parts, you can preload all of them as a sprite, of course, and SVG, and then you will call it a day. You will preload all the seconds and crown and bracelet and all, and you will call it a day. Right? So that's pretty cool. But sometimes you can go that extra mile and do something that's really, really interesting, like maybe even using some sort of wizard. Right? So here you can build your own mattress. Right? And then the first thing that they ask you are your names and how many people are sleepers, how many people are sleeping. And once you type it in, the conversion will increase, mostly because it's becoming very, very personal. Right? So once you actually see, don't judge me, I just typed in something. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to scroll down. Right? And then once you see this, right, the representation of that bed, that's where people will not drop off. Right? Despite the performance, despite the experience, it doesn't matter. This is where things get very, very personal. And this is where you end up actually getting into it. And you can, of course, do this. I mean, I don't know why this exists, but apparently you can extend your tattoo on the arm onto a knife. Right? And then you have this minority report kind of configurator experience where you have to move and float in space and adjust your parts of the experience. That's maybe a little bit too much of a configurator, but I hope that you kind of get the idea. Right? Well, that's maybe just really a little bit too much at this point. One final thing I want to cover as well is the thing that I was working on a lot over the last few months, and that's the notion of respect in our interfaces. Because of GDPR and toolbars and pop-ups and all of that, we ended up in a really strange world. The world which looks pretty much like this. Most of the time you want to read anything, right? And that's kind of confusing in some way. Like imagine you want to book tickets to go to a cinema, right? So first you get a pop-up, that's nice. Then you get a second pop-up, that's nice. And then you get a player that doesn't even play, that's nice. And then you click on close to close it and move away and buy those tickets and it opens in a new tab. Now that's nice. And then you go back and try to close it after all, and it opens in another tab. Now that's 5 times nice. This is the greatest experience ever. And if you still want to give them money, right, and you go to the checkout experience, this is what you're getting. Select your payment method, but read all of that first. Please check that the film, date, session, the information shown above is the one you have selected for your movie ticket, since you will not be able to make changes or refunds when the purchase is finished, right? And all of that stuff. That's just so horrible. I mean, really, you want to give somebody money, and this is what they give you? And then you see this. Well, first, if you don't like insects, I highly encourage you to close your eyes now. It's not going to be nice. Okay, that's on you. There must be a designer sitting somewhere on a chair like this, maybe a bit fancier, and doing this. Right? Like, bugs, huh? This is going to be the best project ever. I'm going to do everything in there. Let's play with little, like, different, shades of blood and splatter and all of that, and the slider with a bug on it, right? I'm going to have the time of my life. This is going to be the best thing ever. And this is a configurator for your bug thing, right? And you can reveal where the bugs have invaded. And then, boom, here is your thing. And the truth is, they have 1 to 2 products only. But of course, Configurator is probably the best thing ever. Anybody loves Ryanair? I mean, I have such a deep relationship with Ryanair. This is just unbelievable. And mostly because I don't like them, they don't like me. It's so mutual, it's great. So this was the website. It's changed over time. And it's actually pretty decent now. But I will never forget, because I'm like an elephant. I never, ever forget. So, except important things. So when you booked a flight with Ryanair, for a long time, the insurance was editing for you automatically, unless you knew how to opt out. Because to opt out, you need to find "Don't insure me" conveniently located between Denmark and Finland. Oh, that's nice, right? That's so friendly. I mean, so friendly. But then somebody said, we could do better than that. Surely we can do better than that. Maybe, you know, whenever somebody opens up our email, it becomes marked as read, and so it's like, missed opportunity. Let's trick people into thinking that it's not open yet. Right? Hold on, let's back. Aha. It kind of looks similar, isn't it? So, this is nice. And then somebody said, I can do better. Instagram. Let's produce an ad that has a hair, and it's not my problem, but this has an hair photoshopped in to entice people into clicking. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Beautiful. Or somebody said, I can do better. Let's add some dirt. People don't like dirt on their phones either, right? Oh, that's even better. And then we said, we surely can do better, like all these beautiful notifications prompts. How do they make us feel like they were loved and cared and respected, right? So my medic would like to send a notification, and you can choose if you want to allow that or you do not want to stay alive. That's beautiful. Or even that, the shameful things like, I am boring, I don't want your notifications. Right? And this is the world we're living in. The first thing that you're greeted with when you enter the site is, would you like to have a relationship with me? Right? This is a very strange way of starting a conversation, really. And in many ways, it's very disrespectful. So we started fighting back. And actually, we started fighting back once this started happening. Like when YouTube was serving ads with CPU-draining cryptocurrency miners. Oh, that's fine, nice. I don't mind my machine being used or misused for other people, mining cryptocurrency for me. That's fine. And then we started fighting back, right? So we started fighting back with AdBlock and all kind of extensions. And I was doing interviews and research in February, and I was amazed. I was amazed by how people see the web at this point. Because this is a standard experience we all have in 2019. Whenever you get a pop-up or modal, block. Whenever you see a push notification, block. Oh, the fancy chat window pop-ups, like, hey, how can I help you today? Block, very often. And then wonderful toolbars at the top, download the app, block. Importing contacts, would you like to sync your LinkedIn contacts with me? Block. What about video autoplay? Block. What would you like to have? Can I have your permission to block? Right? GDPR, okay. Okay, cookie consent, okay, that's fine, that's fine. Advertising, block, onboarding, like this is the best one ever. We spent so much time designing this onboarding flows, like card, swipe, card, swipe, card. And what's the first feature that people demand? Skip, right? Access to camera, block, location, block, email newsletters. Depends. If somebody asks you at the airport to sign in to get Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi, and you have an option, Facebook, Twitter, or email, right? Very often we'll be choosing email, right? But we will not be using, the good email that we have. We have a dedicated email for that. It's filled with good friends, or useless newsletters, kind of weird accounts, and all of that stuff. So, we will give them that one. But in spite of the fact, we're still forced into setting it up and providing an email. I always wanted to find somebody who works at an airport just to get a view on that list of emails they're getting. It must be so much fun to look into all these imaginary friends, imaginary emails out there. And then we also have capture, like, and very often you hear this, I have nothing to hide. So go for it. But whenever your data is leaked, or whenever your privacy is concerned, then you start having something to hide. And it's not about having something to hide. It's about me willing to share a very personal moment with somebody else without Facebook or Instagram or anybody else listening. Right? That's an important part. And I really freak out every time I start Googling something, and then 2 minutes later, I see that ad popping up in Instagram and in Facebook and everywhere else. It's not that I have something to hide, but I don't like being tracked. That's very different. So we kind of have to deal with these things as well. And we started looking into all of those things, like all these extensions from AdBlock Plus to Ghost3 to Facebook Container to Contain Facebook to Stop Chat Pop-ups extension to I don't care about cookies extension, right? And I look at these extensions and I think that this is just me. I'm being obsessed. But when I start looking, interviewing with people, they have these extensions installed. They know, they deal with their privacy, they care about their privacy as well. And so especially in times of GDPR, which I think is a good idea in the right, goes in the right direction, we still need to figure out how it works and how we can actually make it work better. Because this is not the best option out there. Now on Wise, what do? Well, if you want to opt out, and I made it to my habit to opt out and disallow everything by default. So if they say accept or reject, I will always reject by default, or accept and learn more, I will always learn more. Because I'm curious. No, this is nice. Like 120 trackers that you have to deactivate manually, because there is no button to deactivate, right? So that's just disrespectful. And then finally, if you look into privacy policies sometimes, which is a great reading material for Friday night, I would say, you'll find remarkable things, like F-Secure Herald Clause. You agree to assign your firstborn child to us for the duration of eternity. How many of you read privacy policies? It's probably a good idea to do every now and again. Or this one. Anybody uses Amazon? I thought so. Have you read Amazon's privacy policy? If you look into Amazon Web Services service terms, you'll find the zombie apocalypse clause. This restriction will not apply to the event, I just need 1 minute, in the event of the occurrence of a widespread viral infection transmitted via bites or contact with bodily fluids that causes human corpses to reanimate and seek to consume living human flesh, blood, brain, and nerve tissue, and is likely to result in the fall of organized civilization. I mean, it's really better than fiction at this point. So it's highly encouraged to read it. Or, you go into all of those things and you really don't even understand what's going on. So this is a really nice service, terms of service didn't read, which kind of highlights what's happening with your data and what is not happening with your data. So that's pretty cool and friendly. So to wrap up, I showed you a couple of things, hopefully not necessarily bad examples. Hopefully some of these examples are pretty good as well. What I want to leave you with is just one short video. Because we can do a lot of things, we can design a lot of things, but in the end, we tend to over-optimize, and maybe sometimes it doesn't really matter so much. So we have to design better just for people who actually need our help. I would love to see more of this on the web.
You might wonder how blind people deal with everyday challenges. Well, normally the answer is simple. We're not that different from you. We play music. We go to school. We go to work. You get the picture. But sometimes the simplest things can be difficult, and we need a pair of eyes.
Connect to.
First available helper.
That's where you come in.
Establishing video connection.
Through your smartphone, Be My Eyes connects the blind with sighted people through a live video connection. Simply choose if you need help or want to help by the click of a button.
That's a nice picture of you and your family, Caroline. Is it for a present? Yes, it's a photo from my parents.
You can help just by installing the Be My Eyes app,
Print image.
and we'll notify you when someone needs your help. And if you're in the middle of something, don't worry. Someone else will step in. So, would you care to be my eyes?
So, the shape of the button, the color of the button, they don't matter that much. It doesn't matter if it's white or bluish or anything, because this is the stuff that really matters. And we end up designing and over-optimizing those buttons just for the sake of conversion. So I would love to see more interfaces like that. It's a little bit sad, so I just want to finish with that, and this is really the last one. Finish with this one, which is the story of my life. I mean, I show many examples, and you will never get things just perfect. And you maybe don't even have to. It's okay if things are not perfect at any time. That's the story of my life. for designers. Oh. Thanks to Prolo Studio for the video, and with this in mind, meow, meow, and thank you.